From the Spec Network, this is Fragmented, an Android developer podcast where we talk about building good software and becoming better Android developers. I'm Don Felker.
And I'm Kaushik Gopal.
Welcome to the show.
This episode of Fragmented is brought to you by our friends at Kobiton. So what's the deal with Kobiton? Kobiton provides real devices in the cloud. So what does that mean? Well, as an Android developer, it means better testing. And you can test however you want. So basically, they have this really nice UI interface, so you can spin up manual devices, you can drop your APK, get your app installed, and you can go click around and do some manual testing. So if you have QA folks in your company that want to take the app for a spin and test the new functionality you built, you can totally do that. They also obviously have automated tests that you can run, so you can maybe have it scripted up or connected to a CI server, and you can have a suite of your automated tests run. So it's pretty cool. They also have a very effective device lab management solution. That basically means if you have a Pixel device, if your friend has a Huawei device, or your other friend has a Samsung device, well, you can connect all of these and all of you can jointly benefit from having these devices. So they provide this really cool solution where you can essentially connect your device and include your internal devices as part of the suite of devices that you use for testing. So it's really cool. Definitely check it out. Head on over to kobiton.com/fragmented to start your 15-day free trial. And the really cool thing is it's super easy to get started with this free trial. There's no credit card required, nothing. Their plans start as low as $10 for 100 minutes of testing time, which is plenty of time to take the solution for a spin and try it out and see if it works for you. Also, another really good thing that they do is these prepaid minutes that you pay for never expire. So you can use exactly the amount that you need and buy more when you think you're ready. Thanks again to Kobiton for sponsoring today's show.
Well, we have a returning guest here, Kaushik. Florina is back to tell us about something that was recently announced. Florina, welcome back to the show.
Welcome back.
Hey, nice to be back. We've announced already something new, which is the paging library.
Oh,
Very cool. Very cool.
so is this for Room?
Yes, but not only. You don't really need to use Room to use the paging library.
Oh, okay. So I saw your talk that I think you had given it. Was it Google Developer Days? Is that where you gave the talk on it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I saw that talk on it, and I was left with the impression it was only for Room. So it's things for other than Room. Okay, so that's cool.
Yes. I can actually tell you more about it, how you can use it, why you should use it.
So the funny thing is, I remember asking Don, this is a long time back, Don. Do you remember? I was like, hey, if I wanted to technically implement something like a Twitter newsfeed or the Facebook newsfeed, where it isn't just 100 or 500 items, it's an infinite scroll feed. What are some good ways? And I remember you mentioning at the time, it was either loaders or
Don't say that word.
Exactly. And I remember Don very apologetically telling me, he's you know what, sorry man, but you gotta roll up the sleeves and go with the APIs which we don't like as much. But so Florina, you are here today to tell us that world is changing for us now?
Yeah. Well, there's an option that you can still use, which is the cursor adapter.
Okay.
So that cursor adapter makes it easier to map the database query results. But the problem is that these queries are actually run on the UI thread, and then the content is actually paged inefficiently. And there's something called a cursor window. So let's say that you have a very big database and you want to query the database. You want to get all the users in your database, but you have a huge amount of users. Well, the problem with the cursor is that it can fill up that cursor window that it has. And that window only has something like a 2 megabytes buffer.
Okay.
It can't really load that much, not if you have a really, really big data.
Especially if you have an infinite feed or something, then obviously at some point
Exactly.
you're going to hit that limit, right?
Exactly. So actually what the paging library is doing is making sure that you can actually do these huge queries. And well, under the hood is using these cursor adapters, but doing smaller queries that actually that for sure fit in these cursor windows.
So it's kind of just executing them for you behind the scenes to kind of make it seamless for you.
Exactly. If you would try to do this cursor adapter magic by yourself, chances are you'll end up into a lot of problems that you'll need to handle, but which luckily we've handled them for you with the paging library.
So tell us more about the paging library. Is this as part of like the Android architecture components, or is this like an independent library?
So in the end, the architecture components is a set of libraries. It's not just one library. You have one library for Room, for example, one library for the lifecycle, and the paging library will also be a separate library, but part of the components. Similar as the support library, in the end, it's not just the one support library, it's a set of libraries.
Got it.
Yeah. Maybe what's important to mention already from now is that this is in alpha, but really an alpha. The API will change based on your feedback, on developers' feedback. So what I'm trying to do now is give you a little bit of the intro, hoping that I make you curious enough to actually try it and then give us feedback. In the end, that's something that we've been doing also with the architecture components that we've released so far. And we've seen that this feedback is extremely, extremely important for us, for all the developers, both for Google, but also for the community.
Perfect. And we will be more than happy to, try it out and give feedback. It's worked out really well for Room, at least.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this quick question real quick. Is the paging library, I know you said it's not just for Room. Does this only work with like local data sources? Does it provide help for me for only local data sources? Or what if my data source is remote and maybe I'm even using something like GraphQL or just some particular API? Will the paging library work with that? Or kind of what's the high level overview for that?
Sure. So actually, the key word that you mentioned there is data source. What the paging library is offering is an interface, or actually two abstract classes, the keyed data source and the tiled data source. So if you want to work with other stuff like network or whatever other data source, you'll need to implement these data sources by yourself. This is the part that I was mentioning. You don't really need only Room. But if you are using Room, then in the DAO, so this data access object that we talked about last time, you can return this tiled data source. And then Room creates the data source for you automatically.
Are these like Java interfaces that I would need to implement?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. It's not like an abstract class. Fantastic.
The data source, I think it's an interface, but the key data source and the tile data source are abstract classes.
Oh, got it. Okay.
So they have some methods there implemented already.
To step back, data source is like actually one of the parts of this paging library, right? So can you tell us, like, start off with a high level overview of like, hey, I want to implement paging. Like, what are the classes or components that I think I should be using?
Yeah, we got like this big long recycler view, or how do we go from start to finish here?
Sure. So, the main components are a data source, and then you have the UI, right? You know that you have some data coming from a data source, and you want to display that in a recycler view.
Great. Okay.
We all know the recycler view is working with an adapter.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're providing is a PagedList adapter, which actually just extends from the RecyclerView adapter.
Got it.
And this one will work with an object that's called PagedList. So this PagedList will actually load the data from the data source. And it can notify other objects like the adapter about the data changed.
If I have to sum this up, there are basically three components that we have to think about. The adapter portion, which you said is the PagedList adapter, and that's very similar to the RecyclerView adapter that we have now. There's this new component you said called PagedList. That was it?
Exactly.
Okay, PagedList and the data source, which you mentioned, which is basically we have two implementations, and actually I really like the question and the answer that you gave for Don, where if I did want to point to a different data source, that name data source makes a lot more sense now to me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so these are the three components. Fantastic. Okay. If you're in data source, why not dive into the data source component, right? Because I think that makes a lot of sense. So how does the data source part work?
Well, I was mentioning there two subclasses. So what's the difference between them? So one we called keyed data source. So you would use this one when to actually get, let's say, the item on position n, you need the item on position n-1. So it's dependent on the item before it, so you can actually query the database.
Interesting. Could you give us like an example of?
Yeah, I'm kind of confused of what we mean by the n-1.
Sure. Now, all the queries that I have in mind are about the tiled data source. Maybe if I contrast the tiled data source, maybe it's easier.
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
Let's do that, yeah.
Sure. So you would use the tiled data source when you need to load the data from any position. So for example, let's say that you have your list of users and you're just scrolling and it doesn't need to load the items in between. So let's say you're starting from position 0 with your list, but then you're fast scrolling up to, if your users are alphabetically, you're fast scrolling up to H. Okay. And then once you're at H, it will just give you the items from that position. So it doesn't, it knows that it doesn't need to load all of those items in between, and it will just give you the items that you need at that time.
Okay. So if you've got 1 million records, or I mean, if that's a lot, but if you had a couple 100,000 records or whatever, then you fast scroll to, the 50,000th record. You're not going to load all those beforehand. It's just going to load. All right, I want the 50,000th record and the next 25 or whatever.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. And with keyed data source to contrast it, is it basically just get me the next item? Just get me the next item. Just get me the next item. Is it like more incremental? Is that like the...
Yeah, or so, for example, if you would have your users with an alphabetical search, in this case, you would use a tiled data source because you don't need the user before, you don't need the user at the last user from letter M to load the first user from N. They don't depend on each other. But if you have such a query where they depend on each other, maybe let's say you're doing time-based queries.
Trying to think aloud here. So if basically I'm at a position and all I care about is like, moving forward, right? Like I have the existing items. I know what my existing items are. I just want the immediate next items, right? Yeah. In that case, I would use probably something like a key data source. But if I start off with this list and say, hey, I don't care about any of this. All I care is from page 5 to 10. Like I'm not on page 4. I'm probably like somewhere else altogether. But I know that the user has instructed and I have to show results from page 5 to 10. In that case, I would use explicitly a tiled data source. Is that a fair summary?
Yes, that's better. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, interesting. Wow. So you guys like went all in with this paging thing. Like, you're like, no, we're gonna like really like deal with all the cases you can ever think of. Because typically when I think about pagination, I only think about like the keyed data source. I haven't actually thought about like the tiled data source. Because I was like, okay, you just need the next 20 items. Like, load the next 20 items. So I guess what would be different about the implementations between a keyed data source and a tiled data source? Is that something that I don't have to worry about? Like, does your abstract class actually take care of the implementation? Or, if it's an abstract class, obviously I have to do something, but yeah.
So what you would implement is actually how to load the data or based on what to load the data. So you would implement a few methods. 2 of them are load after and load before. So you would actually tell the data source how to actually load the data after a certain item or how to load if you want to load the item before a certain item.
Okay, so like it kind of goes for like both ways for scrolling, I guess, right?
Yes, exactly. The before and after is related to scrolling if you're scrolling up or down.
Or down, yeah. So like, all right, here I'm in the the 20,000th record. I'm going to scroll up real quick. Here's how you do that.
Oh, then you go to 19,000 or something.
Yeah, and then if you go the other way, then it's going to be the after query, I assume. Okay.
Yeah. And there's another important method there for both data sources, which is called count items. So practically, this is the method that you'll have to implement that defines whether you have a finite or an infinite list. So, for example, if you want to get the top 100 users, let's say, then that count would return 100. Or if you're getting some items from the table and you know that that's small, chances are you'll implement in your DAO something like, I don't know, users count. And then that count items method in the data source will just use that DAO load count or users count method. But if you have something that's a long list or something that's maybe expensive to compute or you don't want to compute, you can use a variable that we define, which is called count undefined.
Count undefined. Oh, and this is based. Oh, wait. Okay. So what does count undefined do versus finite?
This just tells, let's say, the data source that this will be an infinite list.
Oh,
and,
okay.
And it will also make sure that it adds some padding. So it will add some null items at the end of your list while the items are being loaded.
Yeah. Why would it add a null items at the end? I'm confused.
Well, let's say you want to show some placeholders. Let's say you want to show something like data loading or something like that. So the user knows that, wait, the list is not over. There's something coming, but you're working on getting the data for the user.
Oh, okay, so it gives you just like a placeholder where you can kind of put some type of UI or something like that. So,
just to improve the user experience.
Okay, all right. I guess I'm having a little bit of disconnect now because I feel like everything that I would want to do, I should be using a tiled data source for them because I am just going to return all of these items sorted by a certain thing. And when I think key data source, I think, okay, maybe the previous item is dependent upon this item. And maybe that would be like, I don't know, I'm just throwing an idea out here, but in some accounting software that transactions are in the ledger are based upon the date that they occur. I have no idea if that's a valid use case for key data source, but it does seem like the current balance may depend upon, each, day's, register transactions or whatever. Do you have, is there any, sample apps that come with the Room library, this paging library, we can see when to use this key data source?
We will have a few examples, yes, and also the code will be quite well documented. So also, for example, when you're going to the key data source Java doc, you'll see also a nice example there.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so we have been talking about this data source stuff for a while, the key data source, the tiled data source, but you mentioned earlier that we have also another component that we need to worry about and work with, and that was the kind of sits on top of it or somewhere in the chain here, and that's a paged list. What exactly is a paged list? How do I need to work with it, and what's it going to be like from a development perspective? Do I have to build it? Is it something you guys return, or what does that entail?
So in the end, the data source just knows, what's the source of the data, but the page list is the one that actually loads the data from the data source.
Okay.
And on top of this also can notify objects about the data change. So this means that if you're working with a RecyclerView adapter, the adapter can get notified about the new changes in the paged list.
Is this something that I need to build, or is this something that the library provides out of the box I don't have to worry about?
What you could do is use a live page list provider. So this one would be an object that provides a paged list. And it actually, all you need to give there is the data source. So you can just use that and it will automatically query the stuff for you. So for example, in your application, you might just define in the DAO your query. So for example, get tweets, and then whoever uses that DAO can just create this live page list provider.
Say I'm returning a tiled data source from Room based on my DAO object. I would construct this paged list using that data source?
It would be even easier than this. You could just return this live page list provider from the DAO.
Okay. So I don't even have to...
Exactly. So Room knows that, okay, you want a live page list provider. So this means that Room is your data source. So it will take care of actually creating the data source for you.
Oh, because it's just Room. So since Room is kind of built to just work with this out of the box. Exactly. So if I'm using Room, then I can just say, hey, I need this live data page list of users or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then it's just going to know, hey, at this point in time, that all right, we're going to use this overload and we're going to return you back that page list of whatever live data. Is that correct?
Exactly. And what you'll need to do is configure it a little bit. So mention stuff like, okay, what's the page size? So how many users or how many tweets you want to load? And also what's an initial load size? So what are the initial number of tweets that you want to display?
Mm-hmm.
And also what's the prefetch distance?
The paged list, is this just a concrete class that I use, or is this is it generic? Or if, let's just say we were sitting in the room together, having coffee, and you wanted to type out some code, what does this look like? How do I, if you had to just tell me what the code was, what would that be? Is it like paged list, list equals, room.get me all my users or whatever? Or what is that? What is it? What kind of class is it? Does it take generics or anything like that?
Yeah, it's an abstract class that
Okay.
actually just extends abstract list. So practically it's an abstract collection.
Okay. All right. So you can use, it's generic based. So I can say if it's going to be, if my objects are going to be users or they're going to be transactions or anything like that, then it will automatically work. Okay.
Yeah, but under the hood, based on the data source, it knows how to create itself, how to create the page list, and it has some other magic there. More precisely, when it gets created under the hood, it also gets two executors, which is the main thread and the background thread. So why does it need this? Because the page list actually loads the data on the background thread. So it really makes sure that the database or the data source, is queried on a background thread. And then all the updates will be posted on the main thread. But this is something that let's say, you don't need to care about this creation phase, because that's something that the paging library does for you.
Okay. So I guess the bricks, I feel like, are slowly starting to fall in place for me. I'm seeing that Room just really makes this, if you're using Room, it just makes this pretty seamless for you. A lot of this stuff's already taken care of. Is that the correct assumption? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So you might hear quite a lot of names right now, but you'll see that once you actually start using it, you don't have that much code to implement. Now,
for some reason, I'm using some different, maybe I'm storing everything in XML. Like the No Kaushik is a big fan of that.
Oh, yeah.
So let's say for some reason that's just the world that I live in. And I have this humongous flat file of XML, and I kind of have to read line by line, or maybe even just a flat file.
Fun.
If I wanted to create do some type of paging, work with the paging library, I could then implement my own different provider. I guess it would be for the paged list. Is that correct? So I could load data correctly?
Actually, you would implement your own data source.
Okay, that would be the data source. Okay.
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
Oh, I see. So page list is almost like an implementation we don't have to deal with. Like, it essentially understands the data source. So if you are able to create a data source, then page list just works. It's like almost like an intermediate concept that was needed for the implementation of like paging.
So practically what you would do, you would create a new live page list provider, and there you would define what's your data source, and that's all. So it's something like 5 lines of code where you're defining the data that you need and where to get the data from. So you're defining that you're working with users or with tweets or with integers or whatever items you want to display. And then you need to tell the list provider where to get these items from, which data source to use.
Okay. All right.
Okay. So let me see. I have my data source. I know what needs to be done. I have my paged list now, which is like the intermediate construct, which it links well with the data source. What exactly, and I would return live data of this paged list is what you're saying, right?
Yeah. Because this live page list provider, actually what it does is return live data of a page list of your item.
Of users or whatever.
Exactly.
Oh, okay. Actually, this makes sense. So the live page list thing is something that I can return directly from Room.
Well, no, not from Room. This is something that live page list provider gives you.
Got it. Okay.
This also explains a little bit under the hood how things work, because in the end, under the hood, the query would return something like a live data of a page list. So, yeah, I would guess it's easier to understand why this also makes sure that it provides updates to your to whatever uses your live data. If you're actually connecting this live data of a page list to your UI, so to your recycler view, then you'll automatically get updates whenever your database changes. So it's easy to make sure that your recycler view contains the latest items from the database.
Got it. Don and I are fans of RX, right? So the natural question that comes up, can I just use like an RX variant? Would that work or would that not work? Can I just like return an observable, have like the page list, like understand how to deal with that? Does that work that way?
So right now it doesn't. I would expect that you are able to implement this also by yourself, but this means that you're not able to take advantage of all of this live page list provider magic that the paging library offers for you. So you could do this, but you'll end up having to implement a little bit of stuff by yourself.
So then in that case, I would have to make like an implementation of the live page list thing that instead returned it an observable page list versus like the live data of page list.
Yeah, exactly. And then you'll have to do actually the mechanism that connects it to the PagedList adapter, so to the RecyclerView adapter.
Got it. One advantage that live data has that RX doesn't necessarily have out of the box is like the whole Android-ness of it, right? Like, so the UI portion of a lot of this is understood by live data, right?
Exactly.
But is not by RX. So I guess like that is one thing, though. Like obviously you can do like a lot of more things with RX.
Yeah, live data is definitely made for the UI layer. So it's built from the beginning with the UI layer in mind, with the life cycle of an activity or a fragment in mind.
Got it. Which would make sense then, like why it's easier to sort of like create this implementation for live data versus like RX for now at least.
So now we've talked about the data source, we talked about this page list, but we didn't actually make the connection to the recycler view. We need the adapter. So here, to implement the adapter, you can either use the PagedListAdapter, so a class that we provide, and then pretty much all you need to do is define how the views are constructed. So let's say do your own implementation of the onBind view holder.
Okay, so this is the regular thing that I've always been doing for RecyclerView. This is like creating the view holder and then populating content and doing all that good jazz.
Exactly.
Okay.
There's one more method that you should call before, more precisely in the activity or in the fragment that contains a recycler view. So this would be a live list adapter util that helps you bind the actual list with the adapter based on a life cycle.
And where do I use this?
So this you would probably define in the same place where you actually have the reference to the recycler view.
Okay.
So I hope this would be in the activity or fragment and not in other places.
And what was that called again? I'm sorry.
A live list adapter util.
And the reason, so I'm trying to think, when you initially told me this, I was like, wait, but I'm already doing that. I'm like doing that with the recycler view, right? Because when I set the adapter on the recycler view, I'm basically linking the list view to the adapter. I guess the reason it makes sense that this exists, and like, correct me if I'm wrong here, is because there's no notion of like, it has no idea of the life cycle, because the recycler view doesn't have an idea of the life cycle component, and the adapter is obviously just like, waiting to be off the life cycle. So I guess that's why even before I set the adapter, I would have to like call this thing like with this live list adapter util and say, hey, you two need to be talking to each other or something along those lines.
Exactly. So yeah, I think the lifecycle owner is important here, because this is the one that defines when the live data is observed. So in whose lifecycle scope. Got it.
Obviously you folks would have thought about this, but I wonder if like there was a way we could just combine the two, right? Okay.
Like a lifecycle aware adapter, page list adapter or something?
Yeah, something along those lines. But I can see like that. I can see how it can get a little tricky, right?
Oh, yeah.
What I definitely suggest is play around a little bit with the library, and then all of these things that you think, okay, but this feels strange, or hey, couldn't we do this?
Right.
Just create a ticket for this. Create a bug, because maybe some things are, let's say, are easy to understand for us since we've been using or we've been developing the API. But any feedback is welcomed.
For sure. Yeah. Having such a strong knowledge of the recycler view in its existence state, like I always try to like relate back. Developers are very stubborn, right? So like they were like, no, I know this. I just want to keep using this. So that's the outlook with which I'm coming. But as I understand like the intricacies of like how this thing is implemented, it's making more sense to me now.
So I was wondering whether we could go a bit over the data flow, like from the beginning to end, because in the end we've covered now all the big components, and let's see how they would work together.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah. So let's say that right now you have your list of tweets, and there's another tweet that's being put in the data source.
Mm-hmm.
If you're using Room, you know that insert has to be on a background thread. So what the data source will do will then invalidate the page list and update its value. So it will tell, hey, now I have more tweets. I have another set of tweets. So this happens on the background thread. But then the page list on the main thread, it will notify its observers of the new value. In our case, the observer of the page list will be the adapter.
Mm-hmm.
So the page list adapter gets notified that there is a new set of data in the page list. So on the background thread, it needs to check what changed. So it needs to do the diff between the previous and the new list. So then on the background thread, it did all of this comparison operation. And then it knows what it's changed. And then on the UI thread, the view can get updated via this onBind view holder method that we all know and love.
All right. So that's great. So like, what are like some good resources, I guess, at this point, right? Where should I keep an eye out for get more information on this page?
After you've listened to this podcast, you're still interested. Where do we go next?
Developers.android.com. That's our main source of knowledge.
Yeah, we'll definitely provide a link to your talk at Google Developer Days as well. That was a great intro to kind of get to see the code while you're talking about it as well. So I think folks would find that really useful.
Sure. Also, keep in mind that things might change based on your feedback. Things can change.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully in 2 months from now, not everything I mentioned will be correct because things will be even better and easier to use.
That's just right. To be honest, though, like, I didn't think that there were these many things I had to be worried about with paging, which I guess is like always the case, right? When you folks have to build an API, you have to worry about like 20 different things, not just Kaushik's problems. So,
and also, we do add a few new components or new classes here, but if you notice, everything does one thing. So the data source only takes care of the data source or handling the source of the data. Then the page list adapter, it's just an adapter. And then the page list, its role is just to load the data from a data source. So there are a lot of components, but all of them do one thing and one thing only. So things are nicely separated, so they can also be extended afterwards as you see fit.
Florina, thank you so much. Thank you for coming back on the show and like letting us know more about this exciting new library. If folks wanted to reach out to you about like more questions specifically that they had, what are some good places they should go to try out and give feedback on like, this new paging library?
Sure. So we're going to put this, soon or already, depending on when you're listening to this, on developer.android.com. There are several ways to get feedback, and I think the most important one is via the issue tracker. We can add a link to the show notes there, because that's definitely something that the development team checks, and you'll get answers quite fast. I mean, if you ever did an issue or created an issue for architecture components, you might have noticed that things got either solved or at least noticed quite fast.
Don, if folks wanted to ask you about your experiments with paging and that secret side app that you've been telling me that you want to build with this, where do we get more info?
Best way to get a hold of me is going to be on Twitter, and that'll be at Don Felker. What about you, Kaushik? How do folks get a hold of you to page you with questions?
Kaushik Gopal on Twitter is like usually the best way. And if folks want to reach out to both of us, find an easy way, then contact@fragmentedpodcast.com is a good email. Florina, thank you so much for all the great work that you've been doing.
Thank you, Florina.
Thank you for having me.
All right, folks. Thank you for listening. We will catch you in the next episode. We'd like to thank our sponsor for the show again, Kobiton. Real devices in the cloud, better testing for you. Have QA folks that need to test the app manually? Well, you can do that with Kobiton. Have automated tests that your devs want to run? Kobiton can do that too. Cobiton is a solution that empowers mobile developers to get your testing done in a super easy way. Visit cobiton.com/fragmented to start your 15-day free trial and see for yourself. Thanks again, Cobiton. That's it for the show, folks. Fragmented is hosted by Don Felker and me, Kaushik Gopal. We edit and produce all the episodes here on Fragmented. Sarah the Amazing Jackson from the Spec Network helps with production assistance and wraps our final mix. Our theme and ad music is by the national recording artist Blueprint from Weightless Recordings. You can find more Fragmented episodes at fragmentedpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you in the next episode.